The German shepherd froze mid-stride, every muscle in his body suddenly rigid. Sergeant Rex's ears shot forward, locked onto something invisible to the hundreds of commuters rushing past. His handler, Detective James Morrison, had worked with this dog for 7 years and had never seen him react like this. Not to bombs, not to drugs, not to armed suspects. This was different. This was primal. Across the chaos of Central Station's main platform, an 8-year-old boy was performing a strange ritual. 5 deliberate taps on the back of the elegant white woman gripping his hand. A pause that stretched like eternity. Then 5 more taps. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision. Tommy Wilson's small fingers moved with desperate hope, his dark eyes sweeping the crowd until they locked with Rex's intelligent gaze for one heart-stopping second before fear forced him to look away. 3 weeks. That's how long Tommy had been living in a waking nightmare that began in his grandmother's backyard. One moment he was a normal child playing in the afternoon sun. The next, 2 men in cheap suits claiming to be social workers were telling him his mother had been in an accident. His grandmother was at the store. Tommy, terrified and alone, had no reason to doubt them. By the time Betty Wilson returned with groceries, her grandson had vanished into a network so sophisticated that children became inventory and families became transactions. Now Tommy stood on platform 12, dressed in clothes that cost more than his grandmother earned in a month, his hair cut in a style that made him look like someone else's child. The woman squeezing circulation from his fingers leaned down, her voice dripping venom disguised as maternal concern. "Keep your head down and don't look at anyone. Remember what happens if you try anything." The threat hung in the air between them, heavy with implied violence. Morrison tugged at Rex's leash, confused by his partner's obsessive focus. "What is it, boy? Are you seeing something I'm not?" The detective scanned the crowd, searching for whatever had triggered this unprecedented reaction. His eyes landed on what appeared to be a picture-perfect American family: designer luggage, expensive watches, 3 well-dressed children standing in formation like soldiers. The woman radiated affluence. The man barked orders into his phone with executive authority. Everything screamed normal except for one detail Morrison almost missed. The smallest child's eyes contained a terror no vacation could explain. "Come on, Rex. We can't approach people just because you're having a strange day." Morrison's words came out uncertain, lacking conviction. In 7 years, Rex had never been wrong. Not once. The dog had detected threats Morrison's human senses couldn't perceive, had prevented crimes before they happened, had saved lives through instincts that defied explanation. And now Rex was refusing a direct order for the first time in their partnership. His paws might as well have been bolted to the concrete as he watched Tommy disappear into the surging crowd, still tapping that haunting pattern. What Morrison couldn't know was that Tommy had absorbed information like a sponge during 3 weeks of captivity. He'd watched a documentary about police dogs at his grandmother's house just days before his world shattered. The program had explained how trained canines could detect distress signals humans missed entirely. 5 taps, the universal code for "help me" in tactical communication. It was Tommy's last desperate gamble, a message thrown into the void hoping anyone would understand. Margaret Whitefield noticed the dog's unwavering attention, and her grip on Tommy's hand intensified until his bones ground together. "Stop being so dramatic. No one is going to save you here." Her words carried the absolute certainty of someone who had perfected this performance over 15 years. Margaret specialized in what she called facilitated international adoptions, a phrase that sanitized the horror of luxury human trafficking. Her husband Richard provided the perfect cover, a pharmaceutical executive with the resources and respectability to make any investigation evaporate before it began. Richard leaned close to Tommy's ear, his breath hot and threatening. "Daddy is expecting you to behave like an obedient son. Remember what happened to the last boy who tried to run away?" Tommy swallowed hard, the memory of that story designed to terrorize him into compliance. 3 weeks ago, Men had appeared at his grandmother's door with manufactured authority and practiced lies. Since then, his life had become a carefully choreographed nightmare. Days spent memorizing his new identity, smiling for photographs that would legitimize his captivity, rehearsing answers about his privileged new life. Nights locked in expensive hotel rooms, listening to phone conversations about scheduled deliveries and satisfied end customers, learning that he was worth exactly $45,000 to people who saw children as commodities. Morrison watched the family move toward their train, something about their dynamics triggering alarm bells refined by 15 years of investigating kidnapping cases. Richard's eyes swept the crowd with paranoid intensity. His hand on the older child's shoulder looked more like restraint than affection. The woman's smile never reached her eyes. They moved with the practiced coordination of people playing roles, not living them. "Rex, stay." Morrison released the leash, watching his partner shadow the family like smoke through the crowded station. The German shepherd's protective instincts operated on a frequency beyond human comprehension. That little boy didn't smell like family, didn't move with the comfortable ease of a beloved child, didn't react with the natural affection children show their parents. Everything about the situation screamed wrong to senses Morrison had learned to trust absolutely. Margaret noticed Rex approaching, and her whisper to Richard carried urgent panic. "Change of plans. There's a German shepherd following us. Activate Protocol B." Tommy's stomach dropped. Protocol B meant medication, meant losing consciousness and waking up somewhere new, disoriented, and one step further from rescue. His window of opportunity was closing faster than the distance to their train. Morrison activated his radio with practiced discretion. "Dispatch, I need to check the documentation of a suspicious family. Train 247, Platform 12. Possible child in danger situation." The response came back immediate and bureaucratic. "Negative, Morrison. No warrant, no probable cause. We can't approach people based on a hunch." The detective bit back frustration, knowing policy existed for good reasons but sometimes prevented good action. Tommy looked back one more time, his eyes finding Rex's for 2 precious heartbeats. Then he did something that could get him killed. He pointed discreetly at Richard's backpack while tapping the 5-signal code on his own leg. Rex barked once, sharp and commanding, a sound that cut through station noise like a knife. Morrison noticed the exchange, watched the deliberate gesture, and something clicked in his detective's mind. This wasn't just fear. This was communication. This child was trying to tell them something specific. Margaret spun on Tommy with fury barely contained beneath her society mask. "Last warning. The next time you draw attention to yourself, you'll get to know the basement where children who don't know how to obey are kept." The threat was specific enough to be real, vague enough to fuel imagination. But Margaret had made a critical miscalculation. Tommy had spent 3 weeks not just surviving but studying. An 8-year-old mind absorbing names, phone numbers, bank accounts, trafficking routes, and operational codes. Information that could dismantle their entire network if it ever reached the right authorities. Morrison had followed Rex for 7 years through situations that would have broken lesser partnerships. He'd learned to read his partner's body language like a second language. Right now, Rex wasn't just detecting danger. He was detecting something far more complex. An extraordinarily intelligent child orchestrating his own rescue in a way no adult would imagine possible. As their train pulled into the station, Tommy took a deep breath and made the most courageous decision of his short life. If that dog was trying to help him, he would give Rex every piece of information he possessed, regardless of the risk. Inside the train car, Margaret positioned Tommy against the window with her body blocking any escape route. Richard sat across from them, pretending to read while his eyes constantly monitored the aisle. The other 2 children, Lisa and Marcus, sat in perfect silence, their blank expressions trained through months of conditioning not to draw attention. "Remember the rules," Margaret whispered, checking that nearby passengers were absorbed in their devices. "We're a happy family returning from vacation at Disneyland. Dad works in technology, Mom is a teacher, and you are our blessed adopted children." Tommy nodded obediently, but his mind operated at full speed, cataloging everything he'd learned during captivity. Margaret coordinated 6 different families across 5 states. Richard managed logistics and forged documentation. The real boss, known only as the Doctor, never appeared in person, operating through layers of insulation that had protected him for over a decade. As the train accelerated, Tommy watched Margaret type a message on her phone. Package 3 delivered as scheduled. Client awaiting Seattle. Transfer confirmed to Cayman account number 4472. $45,000. That was his market value. The price of an 8-year-old boy with no visible scars. In the next car, Morrison showed Tommy's photo to the train conductor. "Have you seen this little boy around? Possible kidnapping case." Helen Rodriguez, 38 years old and mother of 2, studied the image with professional attention. "Yes, I saw him with an elegant family in car 7, but the woman had adoption papers. She called him her son." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Documents can be forged. My partner Rex detected something. That dog never makes mistakes." Helen frowned, memory surfacing. Now that you mention it, the boy seemed tense, and the woman was holding him very tightly, as if she was afraid he would run away. Morrison's police instincts, refined through years of following faint trails, kicked into high gear. "Can I take a discreet look?" Helen nodded, her maternal instincts already screaming that something was terribly wrong. Tommy was executing the riskiest phase of his improvised plan. 3 weeks of observing professional criminals had taught him that documentation was everything in their business. He'd noticed something Margaret didn't know he'd seen. During a bathroom break, Richard had stowed a folder inside a specific backpack. Not just Tommy's fake documents, but files for at least a dozen other missing children. Evidence that could bring down the entire operation if it reached the right hands. Tommy pretended to feel nauseous, his voice weak and convincing. "I need to go to the bathroom." Margaret's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Lisa will go with you, and remember, 5 minutes maximum." Lisa obediently followed Tommy into the hallway, but when they were out of Margaret's sight line, he whispered something that made her freeze. "Do you want to see your family again?" The girl's eyes immediately filled with tears. "They said my parents don't want me anymore." Tommy's response carried adult conviction. "That's a lie. Real families never give up, but I need your help to save us." Helen Rodriguez discreetly accompanied Morrison to car 7, where Rex waited with increasing agitation. The dog had detected Tommy's scent passing through the hallway and now scratched gently at the door, a behavior that signaled imminent threat. "It's that family over there," Helen pointed. Morrison observed carefully. Well-dressed couple, seemingly normal behavior, but their body language communicated falsehood at a frequency he'd learned to read. The woman constantly checked her phone. The man clutched a backpack as if it contained state secrets. The children moved like programmed robots, not living beings. "Helen, I need you to do me a favor," Morrison whispered. "Go up to them, make up some excuse to check their tickets. I want to see how they react to authority." When Helen approached the family with her professional smile, Margaret's entire body tensed. "Is there a problem, miss?" Helen's voice remained cheerful and routine. "Could you show me your tickets and the children's documentation?" Richard almost dropped his newspaper, his hands suddenly unsteady. "The children are in the bathroom, but we have everything here." He opened his wallet with movements too nervous for someone innocent. That's when Tommy reappeared in the aisle, followed by Lisa. But instead of the 5-tap code, he executed something far riskier. As he passed Helen, he dropped a small folded piece of paper at her feet. Margaret was focused on Richard's fumbling. Richard was searching for documents, but Helen, trained to observe details through 20 years of working trains, noticed immediately. She palmed the paper with practiced discretion. The message was written in desperate childish handwriting. "We are not their children. Help. There are 12 of us. Black backpack has proof." Helen felt ice water flood her veins. She caught Morrison's eye and communicated everything with a single look. Tommy returned to his seat, heart hammering against his ribs. He'd bet everything on that moment. watching Richard nervously handle the backpack containing evidence of dozens of crimes. He knew the gamble had been necessary. Margaret relaxed when Helen walked away, apparently satisfied. See, no one suspects anything when you act like a normal family. Her poisonous arrogance had blinded her to the fact that Tommy had spent 3 weeks not just surviving, but studying every aspect of their operation. Names, account numbers, trafficking routes, and most critically, the exact location where other children were being held captive. Morrison returned to his car and activated his radio with controlled urgency. Dispatch, I have confirmation of a kidnapping in progress. Train 247, car 7. Request immediate interception at the next station. The response crushed his hopes. Negative, Morrison. Need more evidence for legal action. The detective's voice went hard with determination. Then I'll get evidence. He looked at Rex, understanding that his four-legged partner had detected more than danger. He detected an extraordinary boy orchestrating his own liberation from inside an international criminal web. Tommy took a deep breath, watching landscape blur past the window. At the next station in Portland, they would have exactly 7 minutes of scheduled stop. 7 minutes to execute the final phase of a plan that an 8-year-old had developed by studying the people who had stolen his life. Margaret checked her phone once more, smiling with cruel satisfaction. 2 hours to Seattle. Soon you'll be with your new family, Tommy. A family that will teach you to be more obedient. For anyone watching Tommy's expression, it might have looked like fear, but anyone looking closely would have noticed something different shining in those young eyes. Not terror, not resignation, but the unwavering determination of someone who had turned 3 weeks of horror into a masterclass on how criminals think, and was now about to use that knowledge to destroy them completely. The Portland station materialized through the window like salvation approaching on rails. 7 minutes of scheduled stop. Tommy took a deep breath, knowing this was his moment. I need to pee urgently, he said with theatrical distress, clutching his stomach. Margaret rolled her eyes with practiced annoyance. Lisa, go with him, and you both don't take a second longer than necessary. But Tommy had calculated every element of what came next. In the hallway, he whispered to Lisa with calm authority. When we get to the bathroom, you scream really loud, scream that we're not their kids. The girl trembled. They'll hurt me. Tommy's voice carried certainty beyond his years. Not if we're surrounded by people. Trust me. Meanwhile, Morrison had convinced Helen Rodriguez to perform a second check. I want to see their reaction when you ask for specific documents for the children. Criminals always get nervous about details. Helen approached the couple again, her smile professional and unyielding. Sorry to bother you, but I need to check the children's birth certificates. Standard procedure for minors traveling interstate. Richard's face lost all color. The documents are in our carry-on luggage. I can get them when the children return. Helen sat down deliberately in the seat next to them. No problem. I can wait. Margaret's fingers flew across her phone screen. Problem, tax inspector asking for specific documents, abort mission. The reply came back immediate and inflexible. Impossible, client has already paid, resolve discreetly. That's when Lisa's scream tore through the entire car like a siren. We are not their children, they kidnapped us. Help. The entire car froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to the aisle where Tommy appeared, running and shouting words that shattered the illusion completely. She's telling the truth. We are kidnapped children. Margaret shot to her feet, desperately trying to maintain composure. Our children are having an episode. Psychological problem. You know how it is. But Tommy had prepared for exactly this moment. If we are your children, what is my full name? When is my birthday? Where was I born? Margaret's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Richard was sweating profusely, clutching his backpack with white knuckles. Tommy's voice rang through the car with perfect clarity. Tommy Andrew Wilson. I was born on June 15th in Detroit. My grandmother's name is Betty Wilson, and she lives at 247 Oak Street. My father's name is Jerome Wilson, and he's in the Army. Helen Rodriguez felt every word like a physical blow. Sir, she said to Richard in a voice cold as winter, open that backpack now. Richard's response came out strangled. "You have no authority to." Morrison appeared in the car, Rex at his side. The dog immediately rushed toward Tommy, barking with relief. "Detective Morrison, Police Department, and I have all the authority I need. Open the backpack or I'll open it myself." Margaret attempted one last desperate gambit. "Officers, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. These children have been traumatized by—" Tommy interrupted with force that silenced the entire car. "Do you want me to tell everyone here the names of the other 9 children they have hidden in Seattle? Do you want me to talk about the $45,000 they received from me?" The silence became absolute. Passengers recorded everything on their phones. An elderly woman held her hand over her mouth in horror. Morrison forced open Richard's backpack. What spilled out made his stomach turn. Dozens of fake documents, photos of children, altered passports, a notebook containing names, ages, and market values of kidnapped minors. Children reduced to inventory in careful handwriting. "Margaret Whitefield and Richard Sullivan," Morrison read from one of the documents. "You are under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, document forgery," and Margaret's shout cut through his words. "Wait, you don't understand. We saved these children from miserable lives. We give them opportunities." Tommy looked directly at her with maturity that made everyone in the car shudder. "$45,000 isn't saving, ma'am. It's selling." Rex positioned himself between the children and the criminals, growling low, the sound of justice finding its target. Helen Rodriguez radioed ahead. "Stop the train immediately. Emergency situation. Criminals on board." As the train began its emergency deceleration, Morrison handcuffed both Margaret and Richard. "You have the right to remain silent." Richard exploded with desperate incomprehension. "He's just a child. How did an 8-year-old child defeat us?" Tommy smiled for the first time in 3 weeks, a smile carrying wisdom beyond his years. "My grandmother always said, when you're the weakest in the room, be the smartest. You thought I was just merchandise, but I've been studying you since day one." The boy pulled a small tape recorder from his pocket, an old model his grandmother had given him as a gift. 3 weeks of recording conversations, names, phone numbers, addresses. "It's all here." Margaret fainted. Lisa and Marcus collapsed into Tommy, crying with relief. Passengers erupted in spontaneous applause. A woman offered chocolate. A man was already calling numbers Tommy recited from memory, alerting authorities about other children in immediate danger. When the train completed its emergency stop, a police operation was already assembled on the platform. FBI agents, local police, social workers. Tommy had provided enough real-time information to dismantle an entire network before it could scatter. Morrison knelt to Tommy's eye level. "How did you know Rex would understand you?" The boy's answer was simple. "My grandmother showed me a documentary about police dogs. They sense when children are in danger, even when they can't explain it to humans. I just had to give him signals he would recognize." Helen Rodriguez wiped away tears. "In 20 years of working on trains, I've never seen such courage." As Margaret and Richard were separated into different police vehicles, Margaret screamed one final time. "This won't stop our operation. We're just a small part of it." Tommy looked at her through the window, his eyes carrying determination that made the criminal realize her fatal mistake. "Ma'am, I memorized everything. Names, places, bank accounts, routes. When I'm done talking to the FBI, your operation will be history." Rex barked once, a sound of victory that echoed through the station. Everyone watched that 8-year-old boy being embraced by officers and social workers, the question hanging in the air obvious and unanswerable. How had a child managed to defeat an international criminal organization using only intelligence, courage, and the complicity of a dog who believed in him when no adult would? The answer lived in Tommy's eyes. Eyes that had transformed 3 weeks of nightmare into the biggest victory against child trafficking the region had ever witnessed. 6 months later, Tommy Wilson sat in the front row of the federal courtroom, watching Margaret Whitefield and Richard Sullivan receive their sentences. 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. The 8-year-old boy they had completely underestimated had become the key witness who destroyed an international human trafficking ring that had operated with impunity for over a decade. Tommy Wilson's testimony, declared Federal Judge Henderson, was the most extraordinary this court has ever witnessed. An 8-year-old child demonstrated more courage and investigative intelligence than many experienced detectives. Margaret looked at Tommy one final time before being led away in chains. Her eyes, once filled with cruel arrogance, now showed only the emptiness of someone who had lost absolutely everything. Richard couldn't even lift his head, a successful executive reduced to a broken shell of a man destroyed by the intelligence of a child. He'd considered nothing more than merchandise. In the gallery, Detective Morrison and Rex watched with quiet pride. "You know what's most impressive?" Morrison whispered to Helen Rodriguez, who had traveled specifically to witness the outcome. "It wasn't luck. Tommy planned every move from the first day of his captivity. The investigation triggered by Tommy's information had resulted in 43 arrests across 7 different states. 86 children were rescued from situations of trafficking, forced adoption, and slave labor. The doctor, the real head of the operation, was identified as Dr. Harrison Blackwood, a respected Boston pediatrician who had used his position to select premium merchandise in public hospitals. Tommy had memorized not only names and addresses but bank codes, transportation routes, and even computer passwords he'd overheard during phone conversations. His 8-year-old mind had become a living database that completely dismantled an organization that had operated for over a decade. "How did you manage to remember everything?" asked FBI Special Agent Amanda Cross during one of the final interviews. Tommy's response carried the wisdom of someone 3 times his age. "My grandmother always said that when you don't have the power to fight hard, you fight with your head. They thought I was just a scared kid, but I was studying them as they studied us." Operation Tommy, as it was officially named, became a case study in police academies across the country. An 8-year-old black boy, using only intelligence and courage, had achieved what entire task forces had failed to accomplish for years. Betty Wilson, Tommy's grandmother, cried as she embraced her grandson in court. "I always knew you were special, boy, but I never imagined you would save so many children." Jerome Wilson, Tommy's father, had obtained emergency leave from the Army to be present at sentencing. "Son," he said with a voice trembling with emotion, "you have done more for others in 3 weeks than many do in a lifetime." Lisa and Marcus, the other children rescued from the train, were recovering with their real families. Lisa had started therapy and was slowly regaining her lost confidence. Marcus, traumatized by longer captivity, still faced difficulties but had renewed hope after seeing that even in impossible situations, intelligence could overcome evil. Detective Morrison was promoted to lieutenant and became a national expert on child trafficking cases. Rex received a Medal of Honor and retired as the most decorated police dog in the department's history. But for both of them, the greatest reward was knowing they had trusted their instincts when everyone around them had doubted. Helen Rodriguez left her job on the trains and became coordinator of an NGO specializing in identifying signs of human trafficking on public transportation. "Tommy taught me that heroes come in all sizes," she said in a lecture to station employees. "Sometimes we just need to stop and really look at the children around us." Margaret Whitefield in federal prison discovered that her arrogance had been her complete downfall. Other inmates learned of her crimes against children, and her life became daily hell. Richard Sullivan had a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the psychiatric ward, unable to accept that he had been defeated by a child. Dr. Blackwood, exposed thanks to Tommy's information, lost his medical license, his personal fortune, and was sentenced to life in prison. "How did an 8-year-old child manage to destroy us?" he repeated obsessively to anyone who would listen. Tommy returned to school like any normal boy, but he carried with him the certainty that he had changed the world. His grades improved. He made new friends. He discovered a passion for investigation that would lead him to consider a career in law enforcement in the future. In an interview on national television, Tommy was asked what he had learned from the entire experience. "I learned that bad adults always underestimate children," he replied with a calm smile. "They think that because we're small, we're dumb. But my grandmother taught me that size has nothing to do with intelligence." The host asked what he would say to other children in dangerous situations. "Never give up. Always pay attention to everything around you. And if you see a police dog, remember that they are trained to protect children. They will understand if you ask for help in the right way." Rex, who was in the studio, barked once when Tommy finished speaking, as if approving every word. Tommy Wilson's story proved that heroism does not depend on age, size, or physical strength. It depends on courage, intelligence, and the refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Margaret Whitefield tried to break a child's spirit, but ended up being destroyed by the unwavering determination she underestimated. At the age of 8, Tommy taught the world that sometimes the smallest warriors fight the biggest battles. And when they fight with their hearts and minds united, they can defeat giants who consider themselves invincible.